My name is Mark, and I don't care for parties. I never have. While the rest of the world puts on glitter and drinks champagne, I usually retreat. I live on the 14th floor of a luxury high-rise in downtown Chicago. It is a fortress of glass and steel, advertised as the safest place in the city. It requires a key card just to enter the lobby, another to access the elevator, and a 24-hour doorman stands guard downstairs like a sentinel. I planned to spend December 31st exactly how I wanted. I had my heavy, noise-canceling headphones on, my favorite video game loaded, and the lights dimmed low. I was completely alone, and that was exactly how I liked it. Or at least, that's what I told myself. At 11:30 p.m., the city began to wake up. The fireworks started early. Even through the thick padding of my headset, I could feel the deep, resonant bass of the explosions. It rattled my chest. The sky outside my floor-to-ceiling windows flashed with bursts of red, green, and gold. It was a constant rhythm of chaotic explosions. It was annoying, but manageable. I turned my volume up to drown out the city, focusing entirely on the screen in front of me. But then, I felt a vibration that was distinct. It wasn't the sharp crack of a firework. It was duller, closer. I took my headphones off and sat in the silence of my living room. I heard nothing but the distant roar of the celebration outside and the wind whipping against the glass. I told myself I was imagining things, just the paranoia of being up so late staring at a screen. I put the headphones back on. Minutes passed. Then I felt it again, a heavy, rhythmic impact that traveled up through the soles of my feet. I paused the game. It wasn't the game audio. The rhythm was completely off. It wasn't coming from the headphones, and it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the floorboards beneath my feet. The unit directly below me was under heavy renovation. The management had told me it had been empty for months. There shouldn't be anyone down there, especially not at midnight on New Year's Eve. I stood up, walking slowly across the carpet. I pressed my ear to the floor vent near the window. Through the metal grate, cutting through the muffled sound of the city, I heard it. It wasn't an explosion. It was a scrape, a slow, agonizing sound, like something heavy and metallic being dragged across concrete. I held my breath, and then a voice drifted up through the darkness of the ventilation shaft. It was clear as day, yet it sounded wet and ragged, a whisper that froze the blood in my veins. It said, "I know he is up there." A cold sweat broke out on my neck. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a drumbeat of panic that drowned out the game music. I backed away from the vent, my mind racing for a logical explanation. Maybe it was a squatter, maybe a construction worker working late, but the voice didn't sound human. I ran to the intercom on the wall to call the doorman. I pressed the button and waited. I expected the familiar buzz, the voice of the security guard asking what I needed, but there was no answer, just a hollow, empty static. I pressed it again. Nothing. True panic began to set in. I looked at the security monitor embedded in the wall, which usually cycled through the camera feeds of the hallway and lobby. The screen was black, save for one thing, the timestamp in the corner. The numbers were glowing green, but they weren't moving. They were frozen at 11 p.m. The feed had been cut an hour ago. I was trapped. I was 14 floors up with no way to call for help, and something was moving in the apartment below me. Suddenly, a massive firework exploded right outside my window, lighting up my living room in a wash of violent, blood-red light. In that split second of red illumination, I saw something that made my knees weak. The vent cover I had listened to earlier was now unscrewed. The metal screws were neatly lined up on the carpet. The heavy grate was pushed aside. The noise of the fireworks had perfectly masked the sound of the screwdriver turning.
I realized then that the dragging sound wasn't renovation, it was the sound of someone climbing up. I wasn't alone. The intruder was already inside the room. As the city began the final countdown, 10, 9, 8, I heard the soft rustle of clothing behind me. I realized that while I was staring at the monitor, something had pulled itself out of the floor. I turned around just as the clock struck 0.
My name is David. I haven't celebrated New Year's in 5 years. Not since the trip to the cabin. In the remote highlands of Scotland and deep in the snowy valleys of the Alps, there is an ancient tradition known as first footing. It is a superstition that dates back centuries. It says that the first person to cross your threshold after midnight determines your luck for the coming year. A tall, dark-haired man brings good fortune and protection, but anyone else brings ruin. I was there with my friends Emily and Tom. We were spending the holiday in a secluded rental cabin miles from civilization. It was a beautiful, rustic place surrounded by dense pine forests, but a heavy blizzard had been raging for hours, burying the access road under 3 feet of snow. We were trapped, but we didn't mind. We had wine, a roaring fire, and each other. We were Americans, completely unaware of the local lore until we found an old, tattered, leather-bound book in the cabin library. We read the warning about the first foot, and we laughed about it. I remember Tom pouring another glass of wine and joking that if anyone knocks out here in this storm, they are either Santa Claus or a serial killer. But as the night wore on, the atmosphere changed. The storm knocked out the internet and the phone lines hours ago. We were completely isolated. As midnight approached, the wind began to howl. It didn't sound like wind anymore. It sounded like human voices screaming down the chimney. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and move on their own. The antique clock on the mantel ticked loudly. Tick, tock. It showed 11:58. We sat in silence watching the fire die down. We raised our glasses to toast to the new year, trying to ignore the growing feeling of dread in the room. The clock struck midnight. The chime rang out, loud and clear, and at that exact second, a heavy fist struck the front door. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. We all froze, our glasses hovering in midair. We were 10 miles from the nearest town. No car had pulled up. We would have seen the headlights cutting through the darkness. Someone had walked through the blizzard to get here. Tom tried to be the brave one. He stood up and walked slowly to the heavy wooden door, his footsteps creaking on the floorboards. He called out, his voice trembling slightly, asking who was there. There was no answer, just the whistling of the wind. He leaned forward and looked through the brass peephole. For a long moment he stood there, unmoving. Then he recoiled as if he had been burned. He stumbled back into the room, his face draining of all color, his eyes wide with terror. I whispered to him. I asked who it was. Tom couldn't speak at first. He scrambled to the lock and threw the deadbolt, his hands shaking violently. He turned to us and whispered. He told us it was a man standing in the snow, but he said the man's face was smooth. He told us the man outside did not have any eyes. The knocking came again, harder this time. The door rattled in its frame, and then a voice came from the other side. It wasn't shouting, it was calm, polite, almost mocking.
It asked us to let the new year in. The tradition says the first foot must be invited inside to bring luck, but this visitor didn't care for rules. The heavy oak door began to bow inward. The wood groaned and splintered under immense pressure, as if a hydraulic press was pushing from the outside. The lock began to whine as the metal bent. We backed away, grabbing fireplace pockers and kitchen knives, anything to defend ourselves. We huddled together in the center of the room, watching the door fail. But the most terrifying part wasn't the strength of the intruder at the front door. It was when I looked toward the back of the cabin. I saw something at the sliding glass door, and then at the kitchen window. A circle of pale, grinning figures stood outside in the snow, surrounding the cabin. Dozens of them. They were waiting for the clock to change. They didn't want to come in to celebrate. They wanted to replace us.
I am James. I used to love fresh starts. I had a ritual. Every New Year's Eve, sitting in my quiet, sprawling suburban home, I wrote my resolutions. I usually wrote them in a leather notebook, but this year I decided to try something new. I downloaded a new AI journaling app that promised to use algorithms to optimize my life and predict my future success. I sat at my desk, the glow of the laptop illuminating my face. I typed in my goals: lose 10 pounds, read more books, get a promotion at work. Simple, normal things. I hit the enter key. The screen flickered. The text I had typed vanished into the white background. Then slowly, character by character, new words began to appear, words I hadn't typed. The screen read, Resolution 1, lock the back door. Resolution 2, do not look at the closet. Resolution 3, survive the night. I stared at the screen, confusion turning to unease. I thought it was a prank, perhaps a hacker messing with me, or a very dark joke from the developers. I tried to close the application, but it wouldn't minimize. I tried to shut down the laptop, but an image popped up on the screen, freezing the computer. It was a photo, a grainy, low-light photo. It showed the back of a man's head sitting in a chair in a dimly lit room. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. It was a photo of me, taken from behind, taken right at that moment. I spun around in my chair, my heart leaping into my throat. The room was empty. The shadows in the corners were still. I looked back at the screen. A new photo appeared. This one was taken from inside my own closet, looking out through the slats of the louvered door. I could see myself in the photo, sitting at the desk, oblivious. The timestamp on the photo was 11:55 p.m. I grabbed my phone to dial for help, my fingers fumbling. The screen was dead black. The battery was drained, even though I had charged it an hour ago. I grabbed the landline house phone. There was no dial tone, just a dead silence. On the laptop screen, the cursor blinked relentlessly. A new message typed out automatically. It said I had 4 minutes to complete Resolution 1, lock the back door. Panic took over. I sprinted out of the bedroom and down the stairs, my bare feet slapping against the cold wood. I ran to the kitchen at the back of the house. The sliding glass door, which I was sure I had locked earlier, was wide open. The curtains were blowing violently in the freezing wind, knocking over a vase. I slammed the door shut and engaged the lock. My breathing was jagged, my chest heaving. I ran back up the stairs to my room. I looked at the laptop. The screen updated instantly. Resolution 1 complete. Then immediately it typed Resolution 2 hide.
I didn't question it. The air in the house felt heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. I scrambled under my bed, squeezing myself into the tight space between the mattress and the floor. I lay in the dust and darkness, holding my breath until my lungs burned, listening. Seconds later, I heard it. The front door downstairs creaked open, then heavy footsteps on the stairs, slow, methodical. Each step sounded like a hammer hitting the wood. They reached the landing. They walked into my bedroom. From my vantage point, I saw a pair of heavy, muddy boots walk into the room. They stopped inches from my face. I could smell the mud and the cold air radiating off the intruder. The stranger stood there for what felt like an eternity, perfectly still. Then my laptop on the desk let out a sharp, cheerful chime. It was midnight. The boots didn't leave. They turned slowly toward the bed, and a voice from above whispered, "Happy New Year, James." As a hand reached under the bed to grab me, I realized my fatal mistake. I had completed the resolutions, I had played the game, but I never asked who was writing the list.